So I want to open with this picture of Berkeley, and I want to do this because I want to suggest the connection between the anti-slavery movement and this. And I want to show you that it's actually a quite specific connection. So you'll see this picture again, but the point is to connect the 18th century with now. So the lecture today is Why Care? It's the history of what I want to call the humanitarian narrative. Now, you might remember that in the very first lecture I said to you that we'd have three basic approaches as well as a more general critical approach. And those basic approaches were, one, the history of human rights as a history of universalism. All people are entitled to X. The second tradition I thought I would expound during the course, I'd tell you about during the course, is a legal tradition. Documents which compel, usually, the sovereign state to recognize these supposed rights. So we start with constitutions, which are meant to limit the power of the sovereign to citizens, and we're going to end the course with constitutions as well, but more importantly, we're going to end the course with international documents, supra-sovereign documents, which are meant to limit what sovereign states do from the outside. That's to say, from a supra-sovereign position of an international organization of some sort, the American Union, the African Union, the United Nations, the European Court of Justice, and so forth. So it was the tradition of universalism and the tradition of law. And I said to you that I would talk to you about a third tradition, which is the history of humanitarianism, which has which, as you'll see, has less to do with legal documents and rights, but with how feelings are put into action. So today's lecture is the first on humanitarianism. And what I wanted to do today is sort of set up for you the basic structures. I want to do it relatively uncritically, because later in the course we're going to be dealing a great deal with the issues that are raised by modern humanitarian interventions. In fact, the next lecture we're going to deal with 19th century issues having to do with humanitarian interventions. But today, what I really want to do is just set out for you a structure, a way of thinking about it, with some specific examples, and those examples will be drawn from the anti-slavery movement, the movement for abolition, which, as I said, I want to tie in with the Nike boycott that had a moment in Berkeley. So the question I want to begin with is the question why care? And it's actually a fairly it's an important and not trivial question. Historically, charity and caring tended to be local, tended to be limited. One cared for one's family, one cared for one's parish, and there was one cared for a local group of people. One also cared for people for whom one had responsibility. That could be parents over children, but traditionally in European and in most paternalistic societies, one cared for the poor, one cared for the needy. So caring for people was part of the mutual obligation that the rulers, or the ruling classes, had with respect to the poor. So today I want to talk about what I think is a major intellectual and cultural infrastructure which grows up in the late 19th century to support something that I want to call humanitarianism. And I want to do this, as I said, in the context of the birth of the first international human rights and humanitarianism movement, which is the anti-slavery movement of the late 19th century, which had manifestations in many national traditions and had many offshoots, but I want to talk to them using mostly the English and American evidence. So let me just stop briefly in the word humanitarianism. What's the word mean? Well, it comes obviously from human, and as isms is an ideology, so it basically is an ideology which claims to put the human and the needs of the human at its center. The word actually comes from theology, and it is the same word in the 18th century used for Unitarianism, which is the view that Christ was really wholly human. And so the sort of connected claim is that we get everything from that what Christ means to us is what he does as a human not what he does as a god. And it's a model for a kind of universal treating other people as human in the way Christ was human. So that's the theological roots. But by the early 19th century, already the word came to me, a group of thinking which took all of humanity, all of human suffering as its sphere of actions. It's not about rights, though rights may be an argument for humane or humanitarian actions. They may be, rights are not necessary, though they may be sufficient. They may be enough to make you humane to say that someone has a right. So today's lecture is about the expansion from this view here, the local, the paternalistic, to the much broader humanitarian, which may also be paternalistic, as you'll see, but isn't paternalistic at its ideological core. Okay, so we go from local caring to much more global caring. And we go from the category of people you know, your family, people to whom you have obligations, to everyone. Right? So to go back to the Nike, no one in that protest knew anyone who was making Nike shoes. That's the sort of amazing, so the question is, why do kids in Berkeley care about someone in Burma or Thailand, wherever, who makes Nike shoes? Okay? And that's, as I say, that we do care in that way is novel, and that's what I want to try to talk to you about today. Whoop. I'm sometimes surprised by the effects that Chris produces. The variety of views on this, which I would reject. That is to say, I don't think, before I give you what I think is the case, I don't think that we start being nice to other people simply because we come to understand them as human in a way we didn't understand them as human before. I don't think there's a big revolution in the late 18th century of human. So it was, we need to care about people who make Nike shoes because they're human. Never thought about that. That's not in that rational way, is not what I think is happening. Secondly, I don't think it's a new moral maxim, because as we saw, the maxims that we need to be good to other people are deeply embedded in the religious traditions of the whole world and have been for thousands of years. So in the late 18th century, I want to propose to you nothing new happens in terms of an obligation. So I want to suggest it's not something new about what is to be human in an abstract sense, and it's not some new maxim. What I want to suggest rather is that we come to feel about people in a different way. We come to feel about people for a different way. And that feeling, combined with ethical precepts and reasons and an understanding of cause and other things I want to talk to you about, propel people to action. So what we're going to try to do today, begin with this, is a view that we change feeling and how we come to feel things. And then I want to talk to you about the institutional and theoretical structure in which these feelings are embedded. So feelings is going to be the center of our story today. And feeling is still some way the center of the humanitarian enterprise in the world today. And is one reason why it gets a lot of criticism. These aren't reasoned interventions, they're just based on feeling. And the humanitarian movement is very sensitive to this and worries about this a great deal. In words, when you give money to the Haitian relief, you don't do a lot of thinking about it. You have an outpouring of feeling, and you click on this thing on the web. So feeling is crucial to this, I want to say. And I want to suggest this following thesis, which is not mine, but comes from a very well-known American philosopher who just died named Richard Rorty. But it's a thesis which I try to elaborate in my own work. And so, in a way, this lecture grows out of work and articles that I've written, and I can post them on the web if you guys want to know a little more about the argument. So, Rorty asks, why care for strangers? The answer you can see. The proliferation of the sort of long, sad, sentimental story which begins, this is what it was like to be in this situation, because her mother would grieve for her.